Hello. Um, Welcome to your Virginia Woolf video. I'm just going to do a little discussion about her before you begin the reading. And what can I say about this? I've got my little notes here, so I'm going to put that in front of me so I can see. I've got my Virginia Woolf. Okay, so it's exciting, right? I know you may not be excited like I am, but I want to give you some reasons to be excited. So let me start with letting you know that in this particular reading, there are kind of two obstacles. One of them is time, and the other one is place. Virginia Woolf wrote this in 1929, and she wrote it in England. So that's quite a ways away from us. That's nearly 100 years. And it's also in a different country. So there are different things going on. So while we have some things working for us, like she is speaking English, she's writing in English, and she's also a Western country in the same way America is, it's happening a really long time ago. And she's going to be using language that is sort of a little bit out of our own vernacular and out of our own time. So when you start reading this, I don't want you to get discouraged. Just know that that's kind of part of the deal. The other thing that people sometimes run up against when they read Virginia Woolf is that she's very abstract in the sense like she's very stream of consciousness. So when she's writing, she's just sort of like going over the thoughts in her head one at a time, one at a time, one at a time. And it's kind of flowing at you and you're like, what the hell is going on, right? And that's very much part of her style. And until you get into that current, it can be hard to catch up with, like, what is she talking about? The other difficulty is that I'm throwing you into chapter 2 of an entire little book here. And you're like, well, and what happened in chapter 1, right? So I apologize for that. But there's some really important stuff in chapter 2 that I needed us to focus on that directly relates to our class. And I'm going to lead you right to it in this video, so it won't be a mystery to you. But I want to acknowledge all of those things first, so you know ahead of time, like, okay, it's not that I'm like being dumb over here. It's nothing like that. It's just, it's part of trying to figure out authors writing out of our time and our place and having different styles of writing. I'm going to give you some context for this book so you understand what's going on in chapter 2. Virginia Woolf wrote this as kind of it wound up being a bit of a feminist project. She is a feminist writer. And in this particular book, she was initially, the project was to write a commencement speech for some graduates of a female school. And when she sat down to go write her graduation speech, she realized like it was turning into this whole other thing. And she was trying to explore this question about women as fiction writers or women as writers and artists. And she noticed that there weren't very many women artists. And she started to ask the question, why? And she didn't know how to bring that to these graduates, these young women who were going to go off into the world and try to make some kind of career, or maybe they had aspirations, like what chances did they have because they were female? So she's trying to problematize these issues and figure it out. And what she winds up doing is telling a very long story about her journey in trying to answer these questions. So it starts out with the chapter 1 explaining like, oh, I've got this thing I have to do, and it opened up all these questions for me, and I'm taking some notes. And it sort of moves into chapter 2 when she decides to go to what she calls the British Museum of Natural History. And it's basically like a library, and she's going to try to answer those questions by going to the library. She also goes to lunch, and she's still thinking and ruminating over all of these things. So in chapter 2, she starts to think even more deeply about things, and she's making more pointed observations about gender and hierarchy. So let me take you, I hope that makes sense. I'm hoping this makes sense. Remember, you can always message me if you're like, I'm stuck on Virginia Woolf in this reading, but I want to direct you to some particular pages to pay attention to, mostly page 35. She's going to say some very powerful things that like connect so deeply to this question of othering and why people do it. Okay. And you know what's crazy is on page 35, you might recognize one of the quotes there. Let's see if you remember this from our first day of class. And how can we generate this imponderable quality, which is yet so invaluable, most quickly? She's talking about confidence. By thinking that other people are inferior to oneself. Do you remember this? By feeling that one has some innate superiority. It may be wealth or rank, a straight nose, or the portrait of a grandfather by Romney. For there is no end to the pathetic devices of the human imagination over other people. Do you remember this? This is when I asked you if this is true about othering. And this is where I got it from, was Virginia Woolf. Right down the page from that, she's contemplating this character that she's created in her mind, and she's calling him the professor. And she actually is drawing a cartoon of the professor while she's at the library trying to answer these questions. And she's getting angry, and then she notices she drew the professor was angry, and she started asking questions about that. And then she asks this question about why does the professor, who is male, need to see the women in his life as inferior? So here's what she comes up with. The exclamation, this is on page 35 to be clear. The exclamation to me, so surprising for why Miss West was an errant feminist, for making a possibly true if uncomplimentary statement about the other sex, which she's talking about men, was not merely the cry of wounded vanity. It was a protest against some infringement of his power to believe in himself, that ability to feel confident quickly. Women have served all these centuries as looking glasses possessing the magic and delicious power of reflecting the figure of man at twice its natural size. Without that power, probably the earth would still be swamp and jungle. So what I'm asking you guys to think about as you read this article, or I'm sorry, you read this chapter, is she is describing to us what the mechanics of othering are, both in gender, but we can also make the argument this is true for other types of gender, other parts of othering too. Othering isn't necessarily about being cruel for cruelty's sake. It's about that quick supply of confidence, that if I can't see that person as inferior to me, how do I feel good about myself? Right? And that becomes the psychological system, and then it becomes a sociological system. And in regards to gender, that's how we come to live in something like a patriarchy, right? Where one sex holds sway and power and influence over the other and makes assumptions about the natural inferiority of this other sex, right? That is clearly othering, and it's clearly hierarchical. But it's because if we don't do that, she says, I see now that this is set up so that these men can feel like they can conquer the world and do all these things. Women have to shrink themselves for men to feel bigger. That's her observation. So could this be true about other kinds of othering? Could it be true in terms of race? Could it be true in terms of able-bodiedness, right? Think about the eugenics movement, that if you are able-bodied and fit and healthy and attractive, you can feel even better because there are these people out there that you can look down on, right? And again, it sounds very cruel, but there's a mechanics to this. I hope this makes sense. I love Virginia Woolf. I think she's fantastic. And I'm hoping you can give her a chance. And if you need to do it in breaks, like read some parts of it and then go back into it, that's totally fine. She takes a little time to get used to her rhythm, but don't doubt yourself. Just keep going forward and pull out the stuff that's making sense to you and speaking to you about the othering that we've been studying in our class. All right, I'm gonna say goodbye for now. I'll see you on Zoom at some point, October 19th.